That's lovely. So yes, I just wanted to take a little bit of your time this evening just to talk about CILIP and about where CILIP is going, but more generally about where we're going as a profession and the kind of role we see developing on the world stage. I did use this word when I met Ian, internationalist, and then I went away thinking, thank God he didn't ask me to say what that means, because I have no idea. But I think it is true. I've spent most of the last 15, 20 years of my professional life travelling all over the world, meeting with people like yourselves, who are working in the belief that society is stronger, things are better when people can create and share and access knowledge and information. So part of my working life I spent working in places like Brazil. I was working in a place called Belo Horizonte, which I don't know if it's known to any of you, if any of you have been there. Beautiful, beautiful city. But they're a country still fresh with the memory of a military dictatorship, where control of knowledge and access to information was a part of daily life. While I was there, I was working while they had a general election, and because of the history of dictatorship, their purdah is so strict that they can't share any knowledge or information at all, which means they can't broadcast when they're canvassing. And so brilliantly, the candidates have to hit the streets with a samba band to get their message across. And if two political parties meet on a street corner, they have to have a samba off in which their respective samba bands fight it out for who gets the votes. And I think our electoral process would be so much more exciting if we had to have a samba off. I've worked in places like South Africa and learned from the people there about the importance of knowledge and information and sharing as part of truth and reconciliation and as part of building a future there. And I've also worked with colleagues in the Middle East where sharing of knowledge is a symbol of progress. It's a mark of liberalism and exchange. I also spent some years working as the UK representative for culture in Brussels with the European Commission. So I'm going to do a straw poll later on about how we would vote in a EU referendum. But I've seen the good and the bad of international working in the collaboration with Europe. But what I took from all of those experiences is that I genuinely believe, and one of the reasons why this was the job I've wanted for a long time, that there are values and principles which unite us, both as people, as individuals, and as professionals, and which unite us across the borders of nation states and politics and economics. And some of those principles are really, really important at the moment. Principles like equality, freedom of speech, the right to expression, empathy, a basic understanding of a common humanity. So for me, first and foremost, the reason why I wanted to come and talk about internationalism is it isn't primarily a political exercise, nor is it primarily an economic exercise. First and foremost, our work internationally is a human process of collaboration and learning and exchange. Now, I'm always quite careful about sharing this quote, but one of my favourite quotes on internationalism comes from no less a political titan than David Blunkett. But in one of his rare moments, he said this about Britain: all politicians feel motivated to define Britishness. I don't know what it is. It's a piece of political game that they play. And so his definition was, I believe Britishness is defined not on ethnic and exclusive grounds, but through shared values, our history of tolerance, openness and internationalism, and our commitment to democracy and liberty, to civic duty and the public space. Now, I can't imagine a better expression of what makes me feel connected to library professionals when I meet them around the world than those shared principles and values. Because, like it or not, we all know now that we live in a global culture. In a very real, very immediate daily sense, our fortunes are intertwined with those of cultures all over the world. And most of the problems that we face, whether they're problems of war or conflict, whether they're about the environment or economics or poverty, are problems which I genuinely believe we're only going to be able to address by working together, collaborating worldwide. They're not problems we're going to solve by being tribal or feudal or partisan or small in our thinking. I'm a very firm believer, always have been, that the future isn't something we're hurtling towards. It's a set of choices we make. We get to choose whether the majority of people around the world live in famine or in comfort. We get to make choices about whether we as a nation precipitate global conflict or try and find ways of navigating through it. We get to choose as cultures whether women enjoy equality of opportunity with men. We get to choose whether girls and boys have the equal opportunity to learn and to share knowledge and information. As a culture, we stand on the precipice of a decision about our role in Europe, which is going to affect all of our lives in ways that we don't yet know or fully understand. I won't really do a show of hands for the EU referendum because it might be a little bit too challenging, but I will note that I spoke to an acquaintance last week who's involved in the European Parliament, and he said this. He said, history does not look kindly on nations that decide not to participate in decision-making bodies simply because they don't like them. It's a challenging agenda that we see ourselves moving towards, but behind the immediacy of this European referendum is a much, much more important set of choices that we have an urgent and an imminent need to make. We are participants in a global unfolding crisis in which millions of people displaced by war are going to need to be supported to find new lives in foreign cultures. We see children who've seen horrors. My mum is a primary school teacher specialising in special educational needs and English as a second language, and she sees the children that are scarred, having seen friends and family die in conflict. We have millions of skilled professionals who are displaced and have no way to use their skills to earn a living. We've got families who find themselves separated across different cultures around the world. One of the things that's really striking to me about those displaced communities is one of the first needs they fulfill after sanitation and food and shelter is information. One of the first acts of displaced and migrant communities is to create things like the library in the jungle in Calais, like the global information network that's helping people track down loved ones and lost friends as they move around the world. So we as a nation can't deny our role in that global crisis, our role in the global stage. And I think there is a very real risk as a nation that we do ourselves and future generations a profound disservice by seeking to look ever more intently inward rather than understanding how we engage with that role. So I wanted to turn briefly to talk a little bit about CILIP and the process that we've been going through to define our plan to 2020. I know that many of you responded to the consultation that ran at the tail end of last year. There were really three challenges that came out of that process. The first was this overarching context of the changing ways in which people want to be able to use knowledge and information, the changing channels and platforms and media and forms in which people are engaging with information. The second was that we need to start building a workforce for the future. We need to look at ways of creating jobs and opportunities that value the skills of library and information professionals, that celebrate professional registration and chartership as a mark of excellence in the application of those skills. And then the third was the role of CILIP as a modern and a progressive and a relevant professional body that genuinely supports and promotes the interests of our members. I won't share the typewritten note which said, but I've got it in my office, I don't care what you do, just get on with it and do something, which was one of my favourite responses to that. The paradox, of course, is that information is absolutely everywhere. Information is increasingly central to all of our lives. It's recognised increasingly as a pillar of business, of health, of communities, of education, of people's daily lives. One of the challenges we see is that in many ways people perceive that problem of information as having been solved by technology. The technology, the interface, has overcome the challenges of the transfer and exchange of knowledge. Now we know that technology solves part of the problem, which is to do with quantity and availability. Never before has so much knowledge and information been available to so many people so easily. But technology has fundamentally failed to solve the problem of quality. It has fundamentally failed to overcome those questions of how we organise, how we structure, how we govern knowledge and information. I believe that in the first wave of this amorphous thing called the digital revolution, people were happy to sacrifice quality for ease of use, for discoverability, for search. I think now what we're seeing is a reaction against that, where people know that it isn't simply the digital tools that provide access, it's the structure of the knowledge, how well produced it is, how well cared for it is. Solving that problem of quality of information at a global scale is one of the most important challenges and opportunities I believe we've ever had as a professional community. In some circumstances, such as particularly local communities, the best model for solving that problem is arguably a physical library building with trained and professional staff that can help people gain access. In others, such as the banking sector, where I was working with a team from Morgan Stanley last week about their use of information, it's about how you scale knowledge across a workforce of 55,000 people working across countries and working across time zones. I believe fundamentally that every school, every business, every community, every organisation needs a librarian. I believe that they need a skilled professional with the training and the broader understanding to maximise the value of the information in that organisation. At the same time, I also think that everybody, every child, every worker, every teacher, every manager, every director, every politician need information skills if they're going to succeed in the economy that we're sailing towards. I'm not asking that everybody becomes a librarian, although obviously that would be nice. But I do think that we ought to demand and expect that people in positions of authority, of making decisions, of leadership, have information skills in exactly the same way that we expect them to have skills in finance and HR and the law. So from our consultation, we take 4 areas for action which we'd like to take forward, and I'd really like to get your thoughts tonight on whether these are the right ones and how we work with ILIG to make them happen. The 4 are, the first of those 4, welcome, do come in. There's wine at the back. This gets a lot better with wine. The 4 areas that came out of that consultation were advocacy, that people need and expect CILIP to be an effective and influential voice. We need to be speaking truth to power, but with influence and impact so that we can achieve the wider aims of our profession. People need us to focus on workforce development, professional registration, skills, training, making the case to employers about why they should create quality jobs and opportunities that make the best use of those skills. We need to focus on member services. I had a wonderful meeting the other day with the Booksellers Association where they have a very laser-guided idea of value for their members. So their membership costs £100, and as long as their members make £100 or more in increased sales as a result of their membership, then they continue with their membership. We don't have that same clarity of value for the members. We need to understand what it genuinely means to add value to your work, to your working life. And then the 4th area, which in a way we haven't connected with much in recent years, is around standards and innovation. We are, under our charter, responsible for promoting the education of the public, both by supporting and promoting the interests of libraries, but also promoting information science. We have a responsibility as the Library and Information Organisation to focus on innovation and development in information science. And so we're going back to embrace that role and to understand what that means. So across advocacy, workforce development, delivering value for our members and innovation, none of those is specific in a particular way to the UK. Advocating for libraries and librarians and the skills of those people in fulfilling our social and our economic aims is absolutely a global concern. It's something we share in common with every library association across the planet. The big issues that confront us as a community, issues like privacy and freedom of information and civil liberties, operate at a human scale, not a national scale. They are naturally areas for global collaboration. Information itself, we know, is increasingly a global commodity. It doesn't stop at the borders of a nation state, and the exchange of that knowledge and information is increasingly a global concern. And developing this workforce is an international movement. Understanding how communities around the world are developing new skills, meeting new challenges, means we can learn and reflect and feed those skills back into our community in the UK. So I'll sort of sum up by looking at what I think are the four main areas I would like to focus on in CILIP's international work. I have to say, I had my first appraisal about a month and a half ago. It's my 6-month appraisal, which I'm glad to say I passed. But part of that was setting a set of objectives by which my work as CEO here at CILIP will be judged. And of those four priorities, one of the areas I will be judged on is how effectively I have defined and pursued CILIP's international strategy. How well are we going to take this forward as a conversation internationally? So there are four things that I'm proposing that we focus on. So if you wouldn't mind helping me pass my next appraisal by telling me how we do them, that would be fantastic. The first is quite simply solidarity. It's not a word we reflect on enough, and very often in the rush of delivering the day job, people forget that we are united and that we should stand in solidarity with our professional colleagues. When the horrific attacks took place around Paris, culminating in the events in the Bataclan, library professionals all over the world, within the first few hours of that event, reached out to their colleagues in Paris. I have a very dear friend, Bruno Racine, who's the Director General of the Bibliothèque Nationale, and he contacted me to say that overnight he'd received an influx of messages of support and solidarity from his library colleagues all over the world, and he wanted to share what that meant. And he said how important it was, the power of that simple message: we stand with you, we are outraged with you, and we will rebuild with you, which was the message that they got from our colleagues around the world. This is a message we ought to bring to our library colleagues wherever they're working and whatever the challenges are that they face. I'm a member of the UNESCO Blue Shield Committee, focusing on cultural property in fields of armed conflict around the world. And that act of solidarity, people in war zones all over the world knowing that their work in protecting heritage, literature, knowledge and identity is valued and cherished by their professional colleagues, makes a huge difference. I believe we should, as the Professional Association for Librarians in the UK, reach out and express that solidarity with colleagues. For example, colleagues I was in touch with last week, working to build libraries for peace in places like Palestine and Darfur as part of recovery and rebuilding in those nations. So solidarity matters, and we should never forget to express it. The second area I'd really like to have a conversation around is around ethics. In the age we live in, our capability, our technological ability, has outstripped our ability to think through the implications and to manage them effectively. We face very real questions around privacy, freedom of identity and information and expression, copyright, protectionism, trade, which are driven by that fundamental capability of technology. Now, I believe that we, as a professional community rooted in ethics, have a fundamental role to play in helping society navigate this gap between what we can do and what we should do. So for me, more than any physical medium, more than any library or book or format, our shared ethics are the basis of the value that we as a professional community are able to offer to society. And as an international community, we have that common pillar of ethics that we need to be able to share, to communicate, to understand and to reflect on. So I'm delighted that CILIP has just reconvened its ethics committee under our president, Dawn Finch. And the first thing that committee is going to be doing is reviewing CILIP's ethical principles and the Code of Professional Conduct, to the Code of Professional Practice, with reference to the IFLA codes, with reference to codes from colleagues around the world, to understand what we can learn and what we can build into that ethical framework. We're also very fortunate that Martin Wade, as our chair, is also chair of IFLA's FAFA committee, the Freedom of Access to Information and Freedom of Expression. And so he's bringing that knowledge of freedom of expression into our wider work. So alongside ethics and solidarity, there are two final areas I think we need to look at as we go forward with our international work. The first is around opportunity. Some enlightened nations are building libraries as an investment in the future of their population. Other, slightly less far-sighted and enlightened nations are allowing their libraries to be shut down or to be hollowed out or to be undervalued. As a global community, we need to show why a strong society and a strong economy needs strong libraries. We need to work together to lobby employers to create opportunities that make the best use of the skills of our members, not just placing libraries and placing librarians in libraries, but putting library and information skills in every business, in every community, in every organisation. And alongside opportunity, the fourth area I think we need to look at is around innovation. One of the things I've really benefited from in my international work is that wherever you go, somebody knows better than you. Wherever you go, somebody has met a challenge, overcome an issue, defined a standard. We tend in the West to have a very privileged view on our ownership of authority and leadership. I remember attending an event in Finland where a colleague from Nairobi came to me and said, "Have you defined a standard for collecting oral histories?" And you think, well, if there were a nation on earth that knows better than I do about collecting oral histories, it's yours. This sort of privileged position that we have, whereas I genuinely believe that in order to learn how better to do libraries in the UK, we need to go out and learn from how library and information is done in other nations. So we need to be an active participant in that global conversation. Where appropriate, we need to be able to share the work that we've done, the work, for example, on the professional knowledge and skills base, which has been met warmly and with enthusiasm by colleagues in countries all over the world. We've seen as well, though, that many countries that have been economically harder pressed than ours have used that as an opportunity to get creative, to create new ideas, to innovate in the way that they do the library and information work. So we need to be able to go out and meet with those people and learn from them. I spent some time working in Serbia, looking at how they're using libraries to build intercultural dialogue and understanding. There's a huge amount that we can learn from them about how we build our own communities over here. It's been hugely exciting seeing our accreditation work becoming international. Our wonderful colleague, Helen Berry, recently came back from Oman. There are in my office the most extraordinary collection of medals and awards and plaques and so on that Helen very bravely brought back in her carry-on luggage from Oman. But the love and respect and acknowledgement of that relationship that we now have there, that we're starting to build in other countries around the world. It's also been wonderful to be able to host more international colleagues here. So just in recent weeks, we've had delegations from Calgary. I spent Monday night with a delegation of librarians from India, with the British Council, learning about their work there and sharing some of the initiatives that we have here. Our colleague Simon Edwards, I know known to many of our Director of Professional Services, spent the last 2 days in the conference of Hungarian librarians looking at skills and training and development. We are truly a connected and a global community, and we need to celebrate that across all of our work. So wherever we go as the Library Association for the UK, we are greeted warmly and with kindness by our fellow professional colleagues around the world. And it's incumbent on us to meet that warmth and kindness by going out and being a partner on the world stage. So as you can see, internationalist is very much my core identity. It's what I believe in. But I also believe international is a key dimension of what CILIP is going to be doing over the next 10 or 20 years. So what I wanted to do is to use this evening as an opportunity to set out to you where we are so far in terms of our planning, how we see that international role, and then to learn from you a little more about your work, your interests, and how you see us being able to work together. I want CILIP to be a good and effective partner for you in the work that you're doing, and I wanted to take this opportunity as well to thank and acknowledge you for all of the effort that you put in to being ILIG and to running the affairs of the committee and the group. I very much hope that after this evening we'll be able to work together more in partnership, but for the time being I've said enough. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Nick. Most enlightening. So, anybody got any questions they want to fire?
I've got a few comments.
Sure.
First of all, I've felt for a long time that CILIP hasn't done enough on some of the issues that you've talked about, the ethical issues, privacy, all the rest of it. Last year, in March, there was a meeting on privacy that Faith organised.
Yes.
And it fired me up so much that I'm hoping to do a PhD on the question of whether librarians have it within their power to actually look after the privacy of their users, given that they, in order to deliver their services, rely on discovery services, content management services, RFID, whatever it is. And that those providers in turn are actually relying on third parties where you lose control and have they actually sold your information without you realising it. So I'm glad what you've
Congratulations for the PhD. That's brilliant.
And if I get a scholarship, it'll be with David as the supervisor in Strathclyde.
Yeah.
The next thing was there was a meeting here a few weeks back that was on the London Member Network organised, and it was about the future of public libraries and everything.
Yeah.
And what I felt was that there was a lady who came along who has been friends of the library, trying to speak up for the library, and all the way through she'd got almost like a 10 or 12 point plan of this is what I've learned.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, even though she'd like to, she's not had time or been able to connect with all sorts of other people across the country to actually share that knowledge and expertise to ensure that people have got a head start in the tips and tricks of what did work, what didn't work, how to get people together and get support and everything. And it was really practical, and I hope to goodness that
she sent it to me.
She did.
After the thing, and I have to sign off line on her email. It's brilliant. It's this is over to you. It's your problem now. Which I love. Very nice.
But she's got so many useful practical tips, hasn't she?
We had the meeting this afternoon. Say that my library by right has been running for 3 months. It's had some impact in some areas, which is great. But we need to mobilise local activism now, and so that's about sharing those tips. It's about sharing facts, because we're being more proactive at the national government level in the media and so on. That isn't stopping the pace of consultations that are going on in local authorities. So we need to attack it at a local and a national level, and so that kind of information is really, really valuable. Well, one of the things I loved about her though is she's really positive in her approach.
Yes.
She talks about what you can have and what you can't.
And she's been doing it for a long time as
Yeah.
well. The last point was some years ago they made my colleagues redundant, and the jobs were recreated in India, where the exchange rate means that it's a lot cheaper. And what I find amazing is whenever I ask my colleagues, they just do not seem to have any way of linking into local groups or whatever to have meetings and everything. And one of the things that I think is brilliant about the profession is all the networking opportunities and everything. And I'm regularly saying I'm off to this, I'm doing that, and thinking, can't you keep looking and, if necessary, set up a group yourself? Because I just think that they're missing out.
I think that sort of human face-to-face networking is one of the most important bits of being part of any profession, and the solidarity that comes out. I went to the London Member Networks evening in a pub in Covent Garden, and some people were in the middle of losing their jobs, some people were just on the other side of having got new jobs, and they were able to share ideas and experiences and just say, look, I care about what you're going through and we can help. And that is such a fundamental part of life at CILIP. One of the conversations we're having internally is how do we sustain and grow that. So a lot of the committees, special interest groups I talk to, finding it hard to recruit committee members and get people to commit the time because pressures of work. There's a whole question around capitation and that's the financial model. So I think what we need to do over the next 6 or 7 months really is have a conversation about what are the ambitions together, how do we enable the member networks to do more of that networking and solidarity. Because when you look at what you get as a CILIP member, that face-to-face contact is one of the most important benefits there are, but it's not perhaps the biggest in terms of how we present the offer. So yeah, no, I absolutely agree.
I mean, one thing with that is people might be willing to contribute, but got difficulty travelling or whatever, and actually having some virtual meetings. And it's interesting, for example, that CLSIG have several of their committee meetings organised like that, and they also advertise it and say, if you're interested in signing in and watching what's going on, please let us know.
One of the, we've got a new vice president who's amazing, Kate Arnold, who's formerly the director of SLA Europe, and they never met in person, as far as I can tell. Everything was virtual, and it seems to have worked incredibly well. But one of the themes she wants to take for her presidential year is around transferable skills, and saying if you're a school librarian and you're looking at what the options are around the profession, one of the best ways to find out is to go along to a group meeting. And so how can we get a bit more of that interplay going where you get people from different parts of our community attending different parts of those groups? Because there's such value simply in learning what people are talking about. I mean, it's really useful. Thank you. Any more of those? It was brilliant. Any other questions or comments?
I think sometimes people get a bit confused about exactly what CILIP is within the mixture of professional organisations.
Right.
Because CILIP talks about advocacy, but it is not and cannot, because of its charitable status, be a trade union.
No.
So, a revolutionary idea. The Royal Medical Colleges are the professional associations, but there's also, and their regulator is the General Medical Council.
Right.
As far as I can see, for the library and information professional, we only have the equivalent of the Royal Colleges of Medicine.
Yes.
Would it be worth imagining
Yes.
what it would be like if there was also a library and information equivalent for the BMA and a library and information equivalent of the General Medical Council? So the three functions are quite distinct, so everybody knows which one to go through about what.
Yes, I think it's a really interesting, and we have imagined it, and it's a really valuable question. There's a whole separate talk about deprofessionalisation, and one of the structures of deprofessionalisation is trying to figure out whether we are a regulated profession, an unregulated profession, or a self-regulated profession. And at the moment, we're operating broadly as an unregulated profession.
We're not. I don't think we're an official. We're not mentioned as an official regulator.
No. And so, while there is a statutory framework around the provision of public libraries, there is no regulatory framework around library information skills. And so, personally, I think it's a direction we should take very seriously, because there was an AGM vote last year in which we were asked actively to oppose amateurisation. Now, that isn't simply about employers failing to recognise the value of the skills. It's also about the loss of that layer of professional standards, professional certification and regulation, which has really evaporated over the last 10 or 15 years. And so opposing amateurisation isn't just an employer proposition. To me, it's about reinstating the structures of regulation. But that, as you know, is a long and complicated process. But I definitely think it's, if we mean opposing amateurisation and re-professionalising the profession, then you have to take seriously the idea of regulation. So yes, it's a direction we want to explore, but it's not in this year's plan. Let's put it that way. But I don't know if people have strong views on that.
Well, I come from a family that's been involved in medical profession for a couple of 100 years, so I know about the distinction between the things in the medical world.
I mean, I do think there's the other side of this. You know, the question I was challenged with, which I'll challenge you with, is, you know, if you don't have a chartered builder, your house falls down. If you don't have a chartered finance director, your finances don't pass muster when they go to audit. If you don't have a chartered librarian, what falls down? And people aren't sufficiently aware of what they're getting, of what falls down. And so I think as an advocate, one of the most important things CILIP can do is articulate an evidence what falls down if you don't have the professional skills to manage the information properly.
One of the things that Martin White says is they never mention when they talk about the risk of not being able to find the information for whatever reason.
And it was really interesting, the conversation with Morgan Stanley was really precipitated by the fact that they've got 10 years of investment in very large-scale IT projects that haven't panned out. And the reason why they keep not panning out, you can talk to Capita and they'll say the same thing, is because you don't have the information architect, the information skills to make use of those IT systems. And so I don't want to present technology as the bête noire because it's kind of miracle of our age, but it isn't the magic bullet solution. Technology plus information management delivers value. But at the moment, if you look at the BCS, they're really only looking at half of that equation. And so we need to fill in that other half. So I've given us 3.5 years for that one. We need to secure, in 2020, manifesto recognition of information management as a core economic and social driver. And so if you look at what it's going to take from today to get into that influence in 2019, 2020, we have a long way to go in terms of the message and the evidence. But I absolutely believe we can do it. We just need to get on with it.
One thing that the British Library does is to justify its existence and hope it gets a higher budget. Twice it's paid research companies to actually come up with the evidence of, for every £1 you spend on us, it generates this amount for the economy as a whole. And if you go onto their site, you can still access those. One of them was Oxford Economics. I can't remember who the other one
I can't, but they were really, really valuable. We have just been working with the Leadership Libraries Task Force on their strategy for public libraries, which is fairly imminent. And there's a wonderful figure in there that, you know, we spend 700 million in the UK on public libraries, but the return on that in terms of direct economic benefit is 3.5 billion. So it's a 1 to 5 ratio.
Because on Monday night I went to something about freedom of information, and one of the criticisms that the government tries to come up with is, oh, but it costs so much money. And I didn't realise it was quite this much, and they corrected me when I was at the meeting. I said, you know, they spend in government a lot more on PR than they do on freedom of information. So just massaging the message that they're getting across. And it's actually 50 times as much that they spend on PR as they do on freedom of information.
It's amazing. And it's a very short-sighted.
But it's useful to have that.
That's really, I quote that one. My other favourite from last week was for a clinician to keep up to date with the clinical knowledge they need in order to do their job, they'd have to read for 3 hours a day. And so the benefit of the clinical librarian in helping them access the knowledge is saving 3 hours of clinical time for every clinician every day. And you add that up, and that is, you know, millions, if not billions, of pounds worth saved for the NHS. But we haven't historically had those numbers to hand. I need to know that we're going into certainly 2019, but over the next 2 years, with those numbers confidently in hand, so that when we're in the right room, we're saying those things with confidence. Because it is an amazing sector, it's just underpowered in terms of its presentation.
I'll come back to your first point about solidarity.
Yeah.
You mentioned Syrian refugees earlier on, we're going to have continuity. And I was wondering, I'm from Highlands and we're getting our first families arriving very soon. And often that's a welcome of person, but also professional, you know, throughout our lives are ready and our staff are ready. But I wonder what the picture was across the UK in terms of how our libraries responding. Is there any way that we are kind of gathering information to say this is what libraries have done in response. This is how our libraries are welcoming these families into our communities. Do you have a big picture?
I wish. No, the closest we got, SCL made the announcement that Society of Chief Librarians, public libraries welcome refugees, which was an important statement to make. It was a good thing. Since then, there's been no direct action to look at where those families are actually going and how the libraries are responding. And I think it's an area certainly we would like to work on. How we do it in a structured way, I don't know. But if you've got thoughts about how we can identify where people are going and what the impact is and what the services are, that would be fantastic. It's one of those things where I don't currently have a member of staff whose job it would be to pull that information together, but I think we could look at how we might bring it together. But so would you see just a sort of a narrative, basically where are people and what the library is doing to help?
Yeah, it just makes some snapshot stories. It's a message of the libraries in terms of the welcoming space.
Yes.
In terms of we will build your new lives with you. We will build it up again with you.
I would like to do that.
People don't choose to build their new lives, whether it's in-store, in the library, whether it's accessing online newspapers so they can find out what's going on at home, whether it's dual language, whatever it happens to be, whether it's working with them in the schools, that they know they are welcome into our library communities and lives very much welcome.
I'll take your contact details, and it would be good just to have a chat about how we might do it. But it feels like the sort of area where we ought to work with SCL, but also the Foreign and Commonwealth Office must be doing work on that programme about where people are going. I know we're accepting embarrassingly few people, but somebody must have oversight of where they're going.
They know exactly where they're going.
Yeah.
They know exactly where each family's been placed, so it should be relatively easy to say which is your local library, what's the local library doing with these families. You should be able to do that information.
It should be. It feels like something where we can do something really useful in quite short order. So if we could perhaps pick it up, if you'd be willing to give me email addresses and we could follow up on it, I think it would be really, really valuable. The only other area where I know that information is being shared elsewhere is there's a Facebook group that's been set up by just a librarian in the US, where if you search on Facebook for libraries in crisis, and what they mean is libraries in the time of crisis, not the libraries themselves are in crisis, they're sharing an awful lot of information about support services for refugees arriving in Germany and the US and other countries. So I do know that's going on, but in the UK I don't think we've got a handle on it at all. There was, I put a proposal to the Arts Council, there was a project, wasn't there, that generated resources for libraries. It was one of the Libraries Change Lives Award winners about 5-6 years ago, and we suggested it would be good to reinvigorate those resources because people need advice and guidance, but that didn't unfortunately go anywhere, so it would be useful to pick up on it again.
Because what's happened certainly from a Highland perspective is that obviously it's all centrally funded from the UK government.
Yeah.
So money has been made available, for example, for Highland to filter down predominantly for adult literacy. We're looking now at actually putting some of that money to actually do something about supporting our staff, because the money's there in place to make sure that the services are available.
Right.
But what we've not really discussed until yesterday, actually, was discussing with something rather higher up than I am in my own mind, about whether or not our staff are going to be ready, when they are going to know what to do or how to cope.
Right.
When they meet somebody who doesn't really understand their language or their culture.
And so there really should
So our
be
staff need training.
a hub and sharing information
Yeah.
and resources. It's really important. Thank you for raising it. We aren't on top of it at all, but it would be good to pick up on it after this. So I'm at the Leadership for Libraries Task Force tomorrow in Northampton, and I'm seeing Kira from Society of Chief Librarians, so I'll raise it with her tomorrow to see what we can do.
It's about 7:20, so that gives us
Fine.
15-20 minutes to eat up the rest of the food, drink up the rest of the wine, and generally if anybody else has questions of any ILIG member or of Nick, we're around till 8:45. Thank you.
Thank you very much.